Part 1, 1700 words. The evening started like any other company event, with people dressed in their best clothes and trying their hardest to look relaxed, even though most of them were nervous. The hall was bright, the lights warm, and soft music played in the background. It was supposed to be a friendly gathering, something the company did once a year, so everyone could unwind and show a different side of themselves. This time, they added a talent showcase. Anyone who wanted could perform something, whether it was singing, dancing, or even telling jokes. Most people were excited, but not truly confident. They knew their coworkers well enough to guess who would impress the crowd and who would get on stage just for a laugh. But no one expected the night to take a turn that would stay in people's memories for years. The CEO was already there, greeting people, shaking hands, and laughing louder than anyone else. He was known for being proud, always speaking with a tone that made it clear he was the most important person in the room. People respected him, but most of them were careful around him. His words carried weight, and his jokes sometimes went too far. But tonight, he seemed relaxed, enjoying the lively atmosphere. He walked around with a glass of sparkling water, talking about how he used to play guitar when he was young. A few people teased him, asking if he would get on stage. He didn't refuse, but he also didn't say he would. He loved attention, but only the kind he could control. At one point, someone mentioned classical music. A small group gathered near the front of the hall, where the portable keyboard had been set up for the performances. A young intern said he wished someone would play something classical, maybe Chopin, because the event always ended up with pop songs or karaoke. The CEO overheard and burst out laughing. Chopin? At this party? If someone here can play Chopin properly, I'll marry them myself, he exclaimed, raising his voice high enough for half the hall to hear. People laughed. The joke sounded harmless. Everyone knew he didn't mean it. It was just another loud comment from someone who liked attention. But those words drifted farther than he expected. Near the back of the hall, a man in simple work clothes held a mop and bucket. He wasn't part of the event staff by choice. He was just finishing his shift as a janitor. He usually avoided gatherings like this, not because he disliked them, but because he never felt like he belonged. People rarely noticed him. They walked past him every day, rarely greeted him unless they needed help. But tonight, he paused his work for a moment. The CEO's voice had carried across the room, and the words hit him harder than they were meant to. If you play Chopin, I'll marry you. He didn't take the marriage part seriously, of course. That wasn't what caught his attention. What stopped him was the mention of Chopin. He hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in years. Not since his younger days, when music was still a part of his life. Before everything changed, he stood still for a moment, gripping the mop handle. His eyes drifted toward the stage, where the keyboard sat untouched. People were laughing, talking, enjoying themselves. No one noticed him. No one ever did, but something inside him stirred. A memory. A feeling he had buried a long time ago. He had once spent countless evenings practicing classical music, especially Chopin. The sound of the piano used to calm him, give him a sense of purpose. But life doesn't always move gently. Circumstances shift, responsibilities arise, and dreams get pushed aside. The piano had been left behind, replaced by practical work and long shifts that didn't leave room for music. Still, the memory was alive. And hearing Chopin's name, spoken so loudly, brought it back with full force. He tried to ignore it. He dipped the mop back into the bucket and continued cleaning, moving slowly around the edges of the hall. But his mind wasn't focused on the floor. He could hear the CEO still joking with people. A few employees tried playing small tunes on the keyboard, laughing at their own mistakes. The janitor felt a strange mixture of longing and fear. Should he say something? Should he pretend he never heard it? The idea of stepping forward terrified him, not because of performing, but because he was used to staying invisible. The idea of dozens of eyes turning toward him made his hands tremble slightly. He took a deep breath and tried to push the thought away. It was a silly idea. This wasn't his world, But then someone played a few random notes on the keyboard, sloppy, sharp, and careless. The sound made him wince, not because he cared about the mistakes, but because he knew what those keys could sound like when treated with respect. He stopped cleaning. His hands tightened. His heartbeat quickened. He felt an urge he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, two employees whispered to each other. They had noticed the janitor pause and look toward the stage. One of them raised her eyebrows. "Do you think he knows how to play?" she asked quietly. The other shrugged. "Maybe he's just curious." But the first one had noticed something in his eyes, something distant. Heavy with memory, the CEO clapped his hands loudly, drawing attention again. "All right, who's next?" he called out. "Anyone brave enough to show off real talent?" More laughter. More light teasing among coworkers. The janitor looked at the keyboard one last time, feeling torn. He knew that if he didn't step forward now, he would regret it later. Not because he cared about the CEO's joke, but because moments like this don't come often. Moments when the world pauses long enough for someone like him to speak. He took a slow breath. His palms were damp. His heart was pounding. Finally, he set the mop aside and walked toward the stage. At first, no one noticed him. He moved quietly, his steps steady but unsure. But when he reached the front row, a few people turned and stared, surprised to see him approaching. An employee near the stage blinked in confusion. Can I help you?" she asked politely. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is the challenge real?" he asked softly. The employee frowned slightly, not understanding. Then she remembered the CEO's loud joke. Her eyes widened a little. Before she could answer, the CEO overheard and turned toward them. "What challenge?" he asked, walking closer. The janitor looked up at him, his voice low but clear. "You said if someone can play Chopin, you'd marry them." The room fell silent. A few people exchanged glances. Some smiled awkwardly. Others looked shocked that the janitor had actually spoken up. The CEO stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or take it seriously. The janitor's expression wasn't playful. He wasn't joking. The CEO quickly put a smile back on his face. That, he said, waving his hand. "Just a joke. But sure, if you want to try, go ahead." The janitor nodded slowly. "Then I want to try." The CEO's smile faltered for a moment. He hadn't expected anyone, especially not the janitor, to respond. But now the entire room was watching. He couldn't take the joke back without looking rude. So he stepped aside and gestured toward the keyboard. "All right," he said with forced confidence. "Show us what you can do." The janitor's steps felt heavier as he approached the keyboard. His heart hammered in his chest. All the old doubts tried to pull him back. But he kept walking. People whispered softly around the room, surprised, confused, curious. Some wondered if he was serious. Others thought he would sit down, play a few wrong notes, and leave embarrassed. But the janitor wasn't thinking about them. He wasn't thinking about the CEO or the challenge anymore. His mind drifted back to the nights he sat alone in a small room years ago, practicing the same pieces again and again. He remembered the soft glow of a lamp, the worn-out sheet music, the way the keys felt beneath his fingers. He sat down slowly. The keyboard felt unfamiliar, but the feeling of sitting in front of it felt like coming home. The crowd waited. He breathed in deeply along. Steady breath, His hands hovered above the keys. For a moment, everything was silent. The janitor knew he was standing at the edge of something important, something personal, something he had once loved. Part 1 ends with him finally pressing the first key. Part 2, 1700 words. The hall stayed completely quiet as the janitor sat at the keyboard, his hands hovering above the keys like he was afraid to touch them. Everyone watched him closely. Some leaned forward, others sat back, but kept their eyes fixed on him. Even the people who had been laughing a few minutes earlier now looked tense. The shift in the room's energy was sudden and strange, as if everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. The janitor took a slow breath, letting it move through him. He felt the weight of the moment, the pressure of dozens of eyes, the bold challenge that had pushed him to come forward. But more than all of that, he felt the old familiar warmth of being near a piano, or something close enough to one. It wasn't the same as the real thing, but it still awakened a part of him he thought he had lost. He finally pressed the first key dot. It was just one note, soft and simple, but it echoed through the hall like a bell. People found themselves holding their breath, unsure of what would come next. He pressed another key, and another, testing the feel of the instrument. His fingers trembled slightly, but not from fear of the crowd. It was the fear that he might not remember the music as well as he hoped. It had been so long. Years had passed without even touching a keyboard, but as his hands settled into place, a sense of calm washed over him. His eyes softened. His shoulders lowered. The noise of the room faded inside his mind. The years between then and now seemed to disappear, leaving only him and the music he once loved. He began to play the opening of a Chopin piece. The notes were gentle at first, cautious, like someone remembering a language they once spoke fluently. A few people in the hall frowned, confused. They didn't know much about classical music, but even they could tell this wasn't a simple tune. The CEO watched from the side, arms crossed, a half-amused, half-curious expression on his face. He still believed the janitor would stumble soon. He didn't think someone like him could play something as difficult as real Chopin music. But the CEO stayed silent, waiting as the janitor continued playing. Something inside him finally clicked. His fingers relaxed. His hands found their rhythm. The shaky beginning smoothed out into a flow that felt more natural, more familiar. The music came alive, carrying him with it. People in the audience exchanged looks. Their faces shifted slowly from confusion to surprise. The melody grew stronger, clearer, like a story unfolding. The janitor leaned slightly closer to the keyboard, his body moving subtly with the music. His expression changed completely. The tired look he had when mopping the floors was gone. Instead, there was a quiet focus, a deep connection to something that felt bigger than himself. No one had ever seen him like this. For a moment, the hall didn't feel like a company event anymore. It felt like a place where time had paused, giving everyone a chance to witness something rare. The janitor's hands moved faster now, but not in a showy way. There was discipline in his movements, years of practice hidden beneath the surface. Every note was played with care. Even people who didn't understand classical music could feel the emotion behind it. A worker standing near the back whispered, "I didn't know he could play like that." Another replied softly, "I didn't even know he played at all." The CEO's smile slowly faded. His eyebrows lowered, and he leaned forward slightly. He wasn't laughing anymore. Something about the music made him uneasy, as if he had underestimated the situation. The janitor continued playing, letting the sound guide him. He wasn't thinking about the crowd, or the CEO's challenge, or what people would say later. For the first time in years, he felt free. The music wasn't perfect. He made a few mistakes, small slips that only someone familiar with the piece would notice, but the emotion behind it made everything feel real. as he played the more delicate part of the piece. The hall grew even quieter. Some people forgot to blink. Others felt a strange pull in their chest, like the music was telling them something they didn't know they needed to hear. The janitor closed his eyes for a brief moment, not because he wanted to show off, but because the memory of why he loved the piano came rushing back. He remembered his younger self sitting in a small room, practicing late into the night. He remembered the dream he once had of performing on a real stage. He remembered how life had forced him to let go of that dream, how responsibility had taken its place. But now, just for a moment, he felt like that young dreamer again. As he reached the middle of the piece, his play became stronger, filled with feeling that came directly from his heart. People in the audience could sense it. The music wasn't just notes anymore. It was a story. One employee wiped away a small tear, embarrassed but unable to stop it. Another placed a hand over their chest, surprised by how deeply the music affected them. Even the CEO could no longer pretend this was just a silly moment. He stared at the janitor with a mixture of shock and discomfort. His challenge had been nothing more than a loud joke, something he said to get attention. But now, the janitor had turned it into something meaningful, something real. As the piece moved toward a softer section, the janitor opened his eyes again. The room around him came into view, but he didn't let the pressure return. He stayed in the music, letting it guide his pace. His fingers danced lightly across the keys, each movement carrying a quiet strength. He could feel his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm. He could feel the music flowing through his hands, almost like it was rising from somewhere deep inside him. When he reached the ending, the notes softened once again. His fingers slowed, moving with tenderness, almost like he was saying goodbye to an old friend. The last note hung in the air for a long moment, then silence. A heavy, full silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The room felt frozen. It was as if everyone needed a moment just to breathe again. The janitor lifted his hands off the keyboard slowly. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. He didn't smile. He didn't look around for approval. He simply sat there, collecting himself, feeling the weight of what he had just done. Then, one person in the back clapped. Just one. It was a single, uncertain clap, but it echoed through the quiet room. Then another clap joined in, and another. Soon, the whole hall erupted in applause. Some people clapped loudly, others gently, but all of them clapped with genuine respect. A few even stood up, moved by what they had seen and heard. The janitor looked down, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to attention, especially not attention like this. The sound of applause felt strange, almost unreal. The CEO remained completely still at first. His face showed a mix of admiration and discomfort. He had no idea what to say. He had made a joke, expecting nothing serious to come from it. But now he was standing in front of a room full of people who were looking at him, waiting for his reaction. Slowly, he stepped forward. The applause faded as he approached the janitor. People held their breath again, wondering what he would say. The janitor stood up, still nervous from the performance. He didn't know what the CEO wanted to do. He didn't know if he had crossed some unspoken boundary by stepping forward. The CEO stopped in front of him, studying his face. The janitor looked back calmly, though his heart was still pounding. For a moment, it seemed like the CEO might joke again. But then he spoke in a quieter voice than anyone expected. That was. He paused, searching for the right word. Unexpected. It wasn't a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. It was an admission. The janitor nodded politely. Thank you. The CEO looked around the room, noticing how people were watching him. He forced a smile. Well, he said, trying to sound casual, I guess I wasn't wrong when I said we might find real talent tonight. Some people chuckled softly. Others stayed serious, Sensing that the CEO didn't quite know how to handle the situation, the janitor stepped back, wanting to return to his work. But before he could move, someone asked loudly, "How did you learn to play like that?" The question surprised him. He hesitated, all eyes turning toward him once again. He rubbed his hands together awkwardly. "I used to practice a lot," he said simply. "When I was younger." "Why did you stop?" Another person asked. The janitor swallowed, his voice softer now. "Life changed. I had to work. I couldn't keep up with music anymore." Those few words carried more sadness than he intended. The room felt it. The CEO cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, it's never too late, right? Maybe we should put you in charge of our music events." A few employees laughed politely, but it didn't land the way he hoped. The janitor only smiled faintly. "I just wanted to try," he said. "I didn't want to lose the chance." Everyone understood what he meant. Some nodded quietly. The moment touched them in a way they didn't expect. As people began talking again, the janitor stepped away from the keyboard. He felt tired, but also strangely alive. He knew life wouldn't suddenly change overnight, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope behind him. The CEO watched with an expression he rarely showed: uncertainty. Part 2 ends with the janitor walking back toward the edge of the hall, unsure what the rest of the night will bring. Part 3, 1700 words. The sound of the applause still echoed in the janitor's ears, long after it had faded from the hall. He didn't know how to feel about it. Part of him wanted to hide, to slip away before anyone asked more questions. Another part of him felt warm inside, happy in a quiet, gentle way he hadn't felt in years. He never imagined he would play in front of so many people again, let alone receive such a reaction. He walked toward the corner of the hall where he had left his cleaning supplies. His steps were slow, not because he was tired, but because he was trying to absorb everything that had just happened. His hands still tingled from the keys, as if the music had stayed in his fingertips. A few people approached him, offering compliments. Some did it shyly, unsure if they were interrupting him. Others did it with excitement, eager to tell him how moved they were. He nodded politely to them all, grateful but overwhelmed. One employee said, "I didn't expect that from you." "It was beautiful." Another added, "You should play more often. You really have something special." He thanked them softly, avoiding too much eye contact. Compliments were unfamiliar to him, especially ones this warm. He didn't know how to hold them, how to let them settle in his heart without feeling strange as the crowd slowly drifted back into their circles of conversation. The janitor picked up his mop again. It felt odd to return to cleaning after such a moment, as if he had stepped out of his life for a little while and now had to step back in. The wooden handle was rough in his hands, a sharp contrast to the smooth keys he had just touched. He dipped the mop into the bucket and pushed it gently across the floor. The repetitive motion grounded him, calming his racing mind. But he couldn't stop thinking about the music, the way it had flowed out of him. The silence that had followed, the applause that came afterward at the front of the room. The CEO stood in a group of people, trying to regain control of the evening. He laughed loudly again, making jokes, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But his eyes kept drifting toward the janitor. Every time he looked, his expression tightened slightly, as if he wasn't sure what to think. He hadn't expected anyone to take his challenge seriously. And he definitely hadn't expected the janitor to become the center of the night. A few guests whispered near him. "Did you see the CEO's face during the performance? He looked like he swallowed a lemon." Someone else said, "He'll never make a joke like that again." The CEO pretended not to hear them, but their words stung. He wasn't used to being overshadowed, especially by someone he usually didn't notice. As the janitor continued cleaning, A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Can I talk to you for a second?" He turned and saw a woman from the communications department standing nearby. She looked nervous, but kind. "Yes?" he replied quietly. She smiled gently. "I just wanted to say, that was one of the most sincere things I've ever heard. You played with so much feeling." He lowered his eyes, embarrassed. "Thank you. I'm glad you liked it." "I didn't just like it," she said. "Everyone felt something. You gave us a moment we won't forget." He didn't know how to respond. Compliments felt heavy, like something he wasn't strong enough to hold. Sensing his discomfort, she added softly, "I won't keep you. I just wanted to tell you that." Then she stepped away, leaving him with a warm but confusing feeling. Minutes passed. The event slowly began to wrap up. People gathered near the exit, still talking about the performance. The janitor heard bits and pieces of their conversations, their voices full of wonder. "I had no idea he could play like that. He should be a musician, not a janitor. He must have studied seriously at some point." The janitor kept his head down and continued cleaning. But inside, their words stirred something deep within him. A part of him he thought had died long ago flickered to life again. Eventually, the CEO approached him. The room quieted a little, sensing tension. The CEO forced a polite smile. "You surprised all of us tonight," he said. The janitor nodded. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just wanted to try." "No trouble at all," the CEO said quickly, but the stiffness in his voice made it sound less sincere. "I was impressed, truly." The janitor didn't respond. He didn't know if the CEO meant it or was just trying to save face. The CEO glanced around the room, then lowered his voice. "You know, if you ever want to be part of our company events, or maybe help with organizing some cultural activities, let me know." The offer surprised him. He didn't expect anything like that. "I'll think about it," he replied politely. The CEO nodded and stepped away, relieved the conversation was over. But even as he walked back to his group, his posture looked tense. He wasn't used to feeling humbled. When the event finally ended, the janitor gathered his cleaning supplies and walked out through the back exit. The night air was cool, brushing against his skin like a soft reminder that the world was bigger than the hall he had just played in. He stood outside for a moment, breathing deeply. The stars above seemed distant, but they made him feel calm. He closed his eyes and replayed the music in his mind. The memory made him smile faintly. As he walked home, his steps were lighter than usual. Each block he passed felt like a page turning in a quiet story. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of possibility. At home, he set down his things and sat on the edge of his bed. The room was small, but it was peaceful. He rubbed his hands together, feeling the faint ache from playing. It wasn't painful, just a reminder that his fingers still remembered. He stared at his hands for a long time, and his thoughts drifted back years ago to when he lived with his parents. They had always encouraged him to follow his passion. His father would sit beside him while he practiced, listening quietly. His mother would smile proudly whenever he mastered a new piece. He remembered the day he had to stop. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a slow shift as responsibilities piled up. His father's health declined. Money became tight. He had to start working. The piano became a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. He never blamed anyone. Life happens. But losing the piano had left an empty space in his heart that never fully healed. Tonight, for the first time, that space felt filled again. He stood up and went to the small shelf near his bed. He pulled out a worn folder filled with old sheet music. The pages were yellowed at the edges, some creased, others torn. He had kept them all these years, even though he couldn't play anymore. They were a part of him, a quiet reminder of who he once was. He flipped through the pages slowly, his fingers brushing over the notes. He found the Chopin piece he had played tonight. The sight of it made him smile softly. He whispered to himself, "I still remember." He sat down again, holding the sheet music in his hands. His room was silent, but in his mind he could still hear the melody. The next morning, when he returned to work, something felt different. People greeted him more warmly than usual. Some waved to him from across the hall. Others stopped him just to say they enjoyed his performance. He nodded kindly to them all, but inside he felt shy. He wasn't used to being seen. Later that day, while he was cleaning an office hallway, a woman from the communications department approached him again. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. She handed him a small card. "We're hosting a small charity event next month. We're looking for someone to play a short piece. Nothing formal. Just something gentle to set the mood. Would you consider it?" He stared at the card, unsure what to say. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. She smiled. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. It could be good for you." He nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." As she walked away, he slipped the card into his pocket. The idea of performing again made him nervous, but also strangely hopeful. That evening, after finishing his shift, he walked past a small music store he hadn't visited in years. The windows were filled with instruments, guitars, violins, drums, and in the corner, a digital piano. He stopped in front of the glass. The piano wasn't fancy. It was simple, compact, nothing like a grand piano. But something about it pulled him closer. He stepped inside the store. The owner greeted him warmly. "Looking for something?" "I'm just browsing," the janitor said. But his eyes stayed on the digital piano. The owner noticed. "Want to try it?" He hesitated. "I don't think I should." "Go ahead," the owner encouraged. No pressure. He finally sat down. His hands shook slightly as he placed them on the keys. He pressed a few notes. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was enough. He closed his eyes and played a small melody. Not Chopin this time, just a simple tune he remembered from childhood. The owner listened quietly. "You have a good touch," he said. The janitor opened his eyes, embarrassed. "I used to play. A long time ago." "Well, if you ever want to start again," the owner said kindly, "we have payment plans. You don't have to buy everything at once." The janitor nodded, grateful but unsure. As he left the store, he felt a strange mix of longing and hope. The music inside him wasn't gone. It had been sleeping. Tonight had woken it up. As he walked home, he whispered to himself, maybe it's not too late. Part 3 ends with him considering the possibility of playing again, not just for others, but for himself. The moment he placed his hands on the keys, the entire room seemed to change. People who had been chatting in the back slowly stopped speaking. A few turned their heads, thinking he might just be testing the instrument. But when the first notes came out soft, steady, and full of quiet emotion, everyone knew something different was happening. He didn't rush. He didn't try to impress anyone. It was as if he was simply talking through the keys in a language he hadn't used in years. His shoulders were relaxed, but there was a deep focus in his eyes. The music wasn't loud or showy. It was gentle, almost like a memory unfolding after being locked away for too long. People walked closer without even noticing they had moved. Some stood beside the tables. Others leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes wide. Someone whispered, "I didn't know he could do that." Another person hushed them immediately, wanting nothing to interrupt the sound. The CEO, who had originally made the challenge as a light joke, now stood completely still. His playful smile faded slowly as he watched the man at the piano. He wasn't sure if he should feel impressed or embarrassed. The janitor wasn't just playing the piece, he was pouring something personal into every note. The sound filled the room like calm water, spreading across a quiet lake. The music rose and dipped, moving gently, as if guiding everyone into a still place inside themselves. Even people who knew nothing about classical music felt something stirring inside their chest dot at one point. A woman near the front placed her hand over her mouth, her eyes softening as she listened. A few steps away, someone else blinked slowly, as if they were remembering something from years ago. The piano wasn't loud, but it was emotional in a way that words could not be. The janitor's fingers danced across the keys with a confidence no one expected from him. His hands knew exactly where to go, as if this piece had never left his memory at all. It wasn't perfect in a technical way. There were tiny hesitations, slight moments where his nerves almost showed, but that only made it even more real. What shocked people the most was not the skill. It was how honest the music sounded. Every note carried a quiet pain, but also something hopeful. It felt like he was telling everyone a story he had never dared to share. When the music reached its softer middle section, the man's expression changed slightly. His eyes lowered, and for a moment it looked like he wasn't in that room anymore. He was somewhere else, maybe a place connected to old dreams or old disappointments. His breathing steadied, and his fingers grew even more graceful. One of the security guards near the door leaned forward a bit, unaware he was even moving. He had been leaning on the wall earlier, bored, scrolling on his phone. Now his phone rested in his pocket. His arms hung loose by his sides. He stared at the janitor, as if trying to understand how such a quiet man had been carrying such a deep talent all this time. The CEO slowly stepped closer, his face thoughtful. He realized how careless his earlier words had been. He had challenged everyone in the room without expecting an answer. He hadn't considered how his joke might make someone feel. Now he stood there, listening to a performance that deserved more respect than the challenge that caused it. A few employees exchanged looks with each other, silently asking the same question. How did we never know? Near the far wall, a young staff member who had always greeted the janitor warmly felt tears prick her eyes. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the sadness in the melody. Or maybe it was the quiet pride she suddenly felt for someone who had probably gone, unnoticed by most people here. The janitor's face remained calm, but there was something deep behind his expression. Years of silence. Years of walking past this piano during events, but never touching it. Years of thinking life had moved on without him. Now he was letting all of that float into the air through his fingertips. Tension built as the music reached its next rise. The notes became clearer, stronger, filled with a growing energy. People leaned in unconsciously, drawn in by the shift. It felt as if he was finally letting something go, something he had held inside for too long. A few people began whispering softly, not wanting to disturb the room, but unable to hide their surprise. Is he trained? Someone asked quietly. He must be, another replied. This isn't something you learn casually. But the truth was more complicated, something only the janitor himself knew. He had once dreamed of being on big stages. He had spent countless hours practicing. But life doesn't always move in the direction someone expects. One choice leads to another. One responsibility replaces another. And soon, the music he once lived for became something he visited only in rare moments. But today was different. The crowd watched as he played through each moment with a sense of purpose. Even though he hadn't touched a piano in years, something inside him remembered exactly why he loved it. The music wasn't just a performance. It was a slow return to a part of himself. As the piece moved toward its last section, his hands softened again. The melody shifted into something gentle, something peaceful. The room relaxed with it. Some people took deeper breaths, as though they had been holding them without realizing. The CEO placed a hand on the back of a chair in front of him, his expression changing yet again. It was no longer shock. It was respect. He didn't know this man's story, but he knew one thing for sure. The challenge he jokingly made had led to something he would never forget. When the final notes approached, the janitor slowed his movements, letting the piano fade naturally. He didn't rush the ending. He let each sound linger, echoing into the silence. He waited a moment, allowing the music to settle into the room. Then his hands finally lifted from the keys. For a few seconds, no one moved. The silence felt heavy but beautiful at the same time. Everyone stood frozen, as though afraid to break the moment. And someone near the back whispered, "Wow!" Another quietly said, "That was amazing." The first clap came softly from a man standing near the kitchen entrance. Then another followed, and then another. It grew gradually, not loud or chaotic, but sincere. People clapped with a kind of respect that felt deeper than the applause given at most events. The janitor looked down, almost shy. He wasn't the kind of person who liked being the center of attention. But today, he couldn't avoid it. His quiet talent had spoken louder than any introduction ever could. Some people glanced at the CEO, curious about what he would say. After all, he had been the one to make the challenge in the first place. He now found himself in an unexpected position standing before someone who had exceeded every expectation. The CEO stepped forward slowly. His expression wasn't joking anymore. He looked serious, thoughtful, almost uncomfortable with himself. The janitor stood up from the piano bench. He wiped his palms on his pants, still nervous despite the warm applause. When his eyes met the CEO's, the room fell quiet again, as though everyone was holding their breath. The CEO opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He took a slow breath and tried again. "That was something incredible," he finally said. He didn't use big words. He didn't try to sound impressive. His voice was simple, honest. The janitor gave a small nod, unsure how to respond. "I didn't know," the CEO continued. "I don't think any of us knew you could do that." The janitor shrugged lightly, a humble gesture that made a few people smile. "I used to play," he said quietly. "A long time ago." The CEO nodded slowly, processing the weight of that short sentence. The room remained silent, as though everyone was waiting for what would happen next. No one laughed. No one whispered. All eyes were on the two men standing near the stage. The CEO took another step closer. "I shouldn't have made that joke," he said. "It wasn't fair to you, or anyone." The janitor looked surprised, but only for a moment. Then he nodded again, understanding the sincerity behind the apology. That people in the room exchanged small glances. Some looked relieved. Others seemed touched by the honesty unfolding before them. The janitor placed his hands together in front of him, the way someone does when they're unsure how to stand in front of a crowd. He gave a soft smile, almost as gentle as the music he had just played. "It's all right," he said. "I just wanted to see if I could still do it." A few people smiled warmly at that. It was such a simple response, yet it said so much. The CEO let out a breath he had been holding. "You didn't just do it," he said. "You reminded all of us what passion looks like." The janitor looked down, shy once again. The room felt peaceful now, filled with a quiet respect. People slowly began to clap again, not loud, not forced, but steady and full of admiration. The janitor stood there, unsure of what to do next, but feeling something inside him shift. Something long buried had come back to life, and everyone in the room had witnessed it. When most of the employees had gone and the evening lights outside the windows turned the glass into a soft reflection, the janitor remained seated in the chair with his empty cup of tea resting on his knee. The room, once full of voices and movement, had grown quieter. A few staff members lingered near the back, discussing small things in hushed tones, while others gathered their belongings. The piano sat silently on the stage, looking almost peaceful, as if it too had poured out something it hadn't shared in years. The janitor's eyes drifted to it, again and again. He still couldn't believe he had played in front of all those people. He had planned to leave quickly after the work event, maybe clean a little, maybe go home early. But everything had changed. The CEO walked toward him again, more relaxed than before. He had taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He looked less like a company leader now, and more like a regular person trying to understand a moment he hadn't expected. "Do you need a ride home?" he asked gently. The janitor shook his head. "I'm okay. I take the bus. It's not far." "Still," the CEO said, "if you ever need anything, please let me know." The janitor nodded, but didn't respond. He wasn't someone who asked for help easily. The CEO didn't push further. He simply stood nearby, giving the janitor time to breathe. After a moment, the janitor spoke softly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." The CEO smiled. "You didn't cause anything. You gave people something real to feel. That's rare these days." The janitor looked down at his hands again. They were calm now, resting gently in his lap. He traced a faint line across his palm with his thumb, deep in thought. The CEO followed his gaze. "When you played," he said, "what were you thinking about?" The janitor hesitated, unsure if he should answer. But the room felt quiet enough, gentle enough, that he finally allowed himself to speak honestly. "I was thinking about the last time I played," he said. "It was before everything changed. Before responsibilities took over. Before life became about surviving instead of dreaming." The CEO listened intently. "I used to play every day," the janitor continued. "I practiced for hours. I wanted to perform on big stages. I wanted to make my family proud. But life has its own ways." He paused, remembering. "A family crisis came," he said. "Then money problems. Then more jobs. And after a while, playing piano didn't fit anymore. I had to work. I had to do what kept the lights on." He touched the edge of the empty cup. "So I let music go. It hurt, but I told myself it was the right thing. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But it's what happened." The CEO lowered his voice. "Do you miss it?" The janitor closed his eyes briefly. "Every day," he admitted. "Even when I tried to forget it." Silence filled the space again, soft and warm. A cleaning staff member nearby called out quietly, "We're locking the side doors soon. Just letting you know." The CEO waved to acknowledge and turned back to the janitor. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said. "Take your time. Think about what you want. Really want. Not what you think you're supposed to want." The janitor's throat tightened a little. It had been a long time since someone had said something like that to him. "I will," he whispered. The CEO gave a small nod and headed to speak with an event organizer near the front. The janitor stood slowly and started to gather his things, a worn backpack, a folded jacket, a small lunch container he had brought earlier in the day. But he couldn't leave just yet. Something inside him tugged gently. He walked back toward the piano, as if pulled by a quiet memory. He lifted the fallboard and pressed one key softly. The note rang out alone in the large room, simple and clear. He played another. And another. Not a full piece, just tiny bits of sound, soft like whispers. From across the room, a few employees paused, watching him with curious eyes. He didn't mind. He wasn't performing now. He was simply remembering himself. A soft voice suddenly spoke from behind him. "It suits you," someone said. He turned and saw the young staff member who had offered him water earlier. She stood with her hands clasped gently in front of her, smiling kindly. "You look peaceful when you play," she said. The janitor blushed slightly. "Thank you," he murmured. "You should keep going with it," she added. "You have something special." He nodded, unsure how to respond to such kindness. The CEO approached again, smiling lightly. "Looks like you can't walk away from the piano yet," he said. The janitor ran his fingertips over the smooth wood. "It's been a long time. And maybe it doesn't have to be," the CEO said. The janitor felt a tiny warmth spread across his chest. After some time, he finally stepped back from the piano and closed it carefully. The last of the employees were leaving now. Chairs were being stacked, and the floor was being swept. The night felt calmer. The CEO offered one last smile. "Take care on your way home." "You too," the janitor said. He walked out of the building slowly, feeling the cool night air brush against his face. The bus stop was only a short walk away. Streetlights flickered warmly above him. The city around him hummed with soft late evening sounds. He sat on the bench at the bus stop and let out a long breath, the kind that carries a mix of exhaustion and relief. He replayed the evening in his mind, the challenge, the music, the applause, the quiet conversations. He remembered the way people looked at him with surprise and respect. That look was new. That feeling was new. When the bus arrived, he stepped inside and took a seat near the window. As the bus moved, the city lights blurred softly outside. He rested his forehead against the glass and closed his eyes. He thought about the CEO's offer. He thought about the piano. He thought about the person he once was, the one with dreams he had carefully folded away. Could he return to that part of himself? Did he deserve to? The bus rolled through familiar streets, and the janitor finally sat up straight. A quiet certainty settled inside him, soft but real. When he reached his stop, he stepped off and walked down the small lane that led to his home. The lights from nearby houses spilled onto the pavement. A stray cat darted across the path, and he smiled faintly. He unlocked his door and stepped inside. The small apartment was simple but clean. He placed his backpack on the table and sat down in the single chair near the window. He let the silence settle around him. Then, after a long while, he whispered to himself, "Maybe it's not too late." The next morning, he woke earlier than usual. Instead of feeling rushed or tired, he felt strangely awake. He ate a small breakfast, got dressed, and walked toward the company building. When he arrived, a few employees spotted him and greeted him more warmly than they ever had before. He nodded, a bit shy but grateful, as he cleaned the hallway outside the conference room. He paused and looked at the piano on the stage. He knew it was silly. He wasn't there to play. But the sight of it stirred something hopeful in him again. During his break, he stepped outside to get some fresh air. The CEO happened to be there drinking. "Coffee." "Morning," the CEO said. "Morning." The janitor replied. There was a small pause. "I thought about what you said." The janitor finally said. The CEO waited quietly. "And I think," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I think I'd like to try." The CEO's face brightened. "You mean with the programs?" "Yes," the janitor said. "I don't know if I'll be good enough. I don't know if I'll fit in. But I want to try." "That's all you need," the CEO said warmly. "The rest will come." The janitor nodded, feeling a growing confidence he hadn't felt in years. In the weeks that followed, everything began to shift. He started helping with small music events, tuning instruments, guiding young learners, showing simple techniques. People began seeking him out, asking for help, asking for advice. He found himself laughing more, talking more, feeling more like the person he once believed he could be. And every now and then, when the room was empty and the lights were low, he would sit at the piano again, not to perform, not to impress, but simply to remember. One evening, while he played softly for himself, the CEO passed by quietly and listened for a moment. "You know," the CEO said gently, "we never finished that joke from yesterday." The janitor turned, confused. The CEO smiled. "The one where I said, 'If you play Chopin, I'll marry you.'" The janitor laughed, shaking his head. "Please don't repeat it," he said calmly. "Someone might take it seriously." The CEO laughed too. "Don't worry," he said. "I learned my lesson." The joke no longer mattered. The challenge no longer mattered. What mattered was the journey that followed. The janitor turned back to the piano. He touched the keys again, feeling a familiar warmth spread through him. He wasn't the same man he had been before that night. He had found a piece of himself again, and this time he wasn't planning to let it go.